Today, we will look at the sounds with the greatest psychological impact during the Second World War. There are countless accounts from soldiers in various books showing that these noises affected them in an immensely deep way. Prepare yourself to hear the worst of them. The Soviet Katyusha rocket launcher stood out as one of the most feared weapons of World War II. Making its combat debut in 1941, during the German invasion of Russia, it was the first self-propelled artillery produced by the Soviet Union. Its impact on the battlefield was devastating, earning it nicknames such as German Killer and Stalin's Organ, the latter due to the characteristic sound produced by the rockets when fired. The system used the M13 rocket, an improved version of the RS-132 previously launched from aircraft. Mounted on special rails, each truck could fire up to 16 rockets, each carrying a 5-kilogram explosive warhead and reaching a range of up to 8.5 kilometers. Despite its ability to rapidly cover a target area, the Katyusha was more fragile than conventional artillery and required more time to reload. Its simple design and low production cost allowed for quick adaptation to various platforms. Initially mounted only on trucks, it was soon installed on tanks, tractors, armored trains, and even small naval vessels. During the war, many tanks received through the Lend-Lease program, considered unsuitable for armored combat on the Eastern Front, were repurposed as launch platforms. However, the American 2.5-ton Studebaker trucks stood out for their off-road performance, becoming the preferred choice for mounting the Katyushas, with thousands used by the Red Army. Although its role was crucial in World War II, the Katyusha continued to see action in the following decades. During the Cold War, thousands were exported to Soviet allies and produced under license in several countries. Its lethal characteristics were still encountered by American forces during the Korean War and later in Iraq, cementing its reputation as one of the most influential artillery weapons of the 20th century. Sounds evoke as much terror as the piercing howl of the siren on the unmistakable Junkers Ju-87. First used during the Spanish Civil War in 1936, the Stuka became a key component of the Blitzkrieg, leading air attacks during the invasion of Poland in 1939 and contributing to the rapid conquests of Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France the following year. With its fixed landing gear and inverted gull wings, the Stuka was unmistakable. Installed on the main landing gear struts, the air-driven sirens, officially called Larmgerät, noise device, served not only as a propagandistic symbol of German air power, but also gave pilots audible feedback on the aircraft's speed. When the Stuka dived toward its target, the rush of air through the sirens produced a terrifying wail, shattering the morale of soldiers and civilians before the bombs even hit. Although innovative and highly effective in ground attack and anti-ship missions, the Stuka had significant limitations. To ensure that the aircraft could pull out of a dive even if the pilot lost consciousness due to G-forces, the design included automatic air brakes under the wings. However, its lack of speed and maneuverability made it highly vulnerable to enemy fighters. During the Battle of Britain, the need for strong fighter escort became evident, as Stukas were easy prey for British Spitfires and Hurricanes. Over time, the psychological effectiveness of the Jericho siren decreased. Enemies began to recognize it as an early warning of an incoming attack. Furthermore, the Ju-87 pilots themselves hated the deafening noise, which in the early versions could not be turned off. The incessant sound over multiple missions was so unbearable that many squadrons eventually removed the sirens altogether to preserve the sanity of their crews. One of the most iconic sounds of the Second World War, this list includes the distinctive, intermittent noise of the infamous V-1 rocket. Also known as the flying bomb, buzz bomb, doodlebug, or cherry stone, the V-1 was developed for large-scale terror bombing against London. This weapon was an unmanned monoplane and the only production aircraft powered by a pulse jet engine. It carried a 1-ton warhead and was launched from a special ramp, reaching a cruising speed of 650 kilometers per hour and a range of over 250 kilometers. What made this weapon so terrifying was not just its continuous buzzing sound, but the fact that when it reached its target, the engine would shut off due to fuel exhaustion. What followed was a chilling moment of silence before the warhead glided to the ground and exploded. The V-1 was the first of the Vergeltungswaffen, vengeance weapons, deployed for terror bombing against London. It was developed at the Army Research Center in Peenemünde in 1939 by the Luftwaffe at the beginning of World War II and was initially known by the codename Cherry Stone. Due to its limited range, the thousands of V-1 missiles launched against England were fired from installations along the French, Pas-de-Calais, and Dutch coasts or carried by modified He-111 aircraft. As part of the operations against the V-1, the British organized an air defense system composed of anti-aircraft guns, barrage balloons, and fighters to intercept the bombs before they reached their targets. Meanwhile, launch sites and underground storage depots became targets of Allied attacks, including strategic bombings. Finally, I end this list with one of the most terrifying sounds of the Second World War: aerial bombings, also known as strategic bombings. These attacks were a widely used tactic throughout the conflict, as many military strategists believed that destroying the enemy's industrial and political infrastructure could secure major victories. However, this often meant striking densely populated areas, resulting in deliberate campaigns to spread terror among civilians and undermine their morale. In addition to the piercing wail of air raid sirens, the sky would be filled with the menacing roar of hundreds of Luftwaffe aircraft, followed by deafening explosions and the desperate screams of the wounded. One of the most infamous strategic bombings of the Second World War was the London Blitz, which took place between 1940 and 1941. The attack began on September 7, 1940, on what became known as Black Saturday, when German bombers devastated the British capital, leaving 430 dead and 1,600 injured. For the next 57 days, London suffered continuous attacks, both at night and during the day. The height of destruction occurred between May 10th and 11th, 1941, when bombers dropped 711 tons of explosives and 2,393 incendiary bombs, resulting in the deaths of 1,436 civilians. This was the last major attack until January 1943. Although London was the most heavily affected target, the Blitz struck cities across Britain. Few areas escaped the air raids, and in smaller, more compact cities, the bombings could have devastating effects. Starting in November 1940, major industrial and urban centers became priority targets, and in early 1941, a new wave of attacks focused on British ports. Relief came only in June of that year, when the Luftwaffe shifted its attention to Russia and the Mediterranean. Over those 9 months, more than 43,500 civilians lost their lives, leaving deep scars on cities and towns throughout the United Kingdom. Machine gun considered one of the most iconic machine guns of all time, the MG42 was developed by Germany in 1942 as a light, portable, general-purpose weapon. Widely used by the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS, this machine gun quickly earned a terrifying reputation on the battlefield. Belt-fed, the MG42 had no single-shot mode and fired 7.92 mm ammunition at an impressive rate of 1,500 rounds per minute. Its psychological impact was so great that the United States had to produce a special training film to accustom its troops to the intimidating sound of the weapon. The MG42 received several nicknames. The Americans called it Hitler's buzzsaw due to its ability to cut down soldiers in combat, while the Russians nicknamed it the Linoleum Ripper because of the characteristic sound of its bursts. For British and American soldiers, accustomed to magazine-fed machine guns, the unmistakable roar of the MG42 was a harbinger of imminent death. Was a recoil-operated, air-cooled weapon designed to be cheaper and faster to produce than its predecessor, the MG34. Nevertheless, both remained in use until the end of the war. Using the standard German 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser cartridge, the MG42 stood out for its reliability and ease of operation. Its main distinction was its extremely high rate of fire for a weapon using such powerful ammunition, on average 1,200 rounds per minute. For comparison, the MG34 reached around 850 rounds per minute, while other machine guns of the era, such as the M1919 Browning, the FM24/29, and the Bren gun, ranged between 450 and 600 rounds per minute. If you heard the sound of metal tracks clanking against the ground, accompanied by the roar of an engine, it was a clear sign that a heavy armored vehicle was nearby. Two of the most iconic tanks of the Second World War were the Panzerkampfwagen 5 and 6, better known as the Panther and the Tiger. These vehicles were heavily armored and equipped with extremely powerful anti-tank guns, capable of destroying any Allied armored vehicle on the battlefield. Despite their reliability, Germany lacked the resources to produce them on a large scale. However, their reputation was so legendary that the mere sound or sight of one of these tanks was enough to spread fear among Allied tank crews and infantry soldiers. Another terrifying sound on the battlefields of the Second World War was that of the Panzerwerfer. Nicknamed by the Allies as the Mini Moaner, it was a self-propelled rocket launcher used by Germany, introduced in April 1943. Its main purpose was to fire large-scale rocket barrages against enemy, especially Allied positions. Unlike conventional artillery, which was more accurate, the Panzerwerfer's rockets covered a wider area, adding a powerful psychological component to the battle, largely due to the iconic sound of their engines. Weighing up to 7.1 tons and measuring 6 meters in length, the Panzerwerfer could reach speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour. Although it was primarily a fire support weapon, some models were equipped with a machine gun mounted above the cab, providing defense against infantry attacks. The Panzerwerfer 42 of Maltier was widely used for large-scale attacks against Soviet forces, where wide-area bombardments proved more effective than the precise shots of conventional artillery. Its ability to cover vast areas and create a significant psychological impact was one of the weapon's greatest strengths. The thunder of the rockets, the smoke, the shrapnel, and the debris created a scene of chaos, intensifying the effect of the assault. Now I'm going to leave you with several images of World War II with pure audio so that you can have an even greater sense of how things really were.